we're going to bring up the Lyndon Porter again, and he's going to talk to us this time about some foliar diseases that might affect your crops. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lyndon.
All right. Once again, so this is a long time ago. Good morning again. This time I'd like to talk about foliar management of two different foliar diseases on legumes. And this is the same slide that I showed with the root rot resistant, the root diseases that I showed you before. Just a reminder that these are the practices that we're using to try to manage different disease out there. So once again, cultural practices, seed treatments, foliar chemical or biological applications, and genetic resistance. So the first foliar disease that I'd like to talk about is Sclerotinia stem rot, and this is also known as white mold. And pictured here are some infected pods. You see a brownish tan. It actually is kind of a slimy. It's got a slimy feel to it. When it infects, it also can cause a sliminess to the infected stem tissue that you see here, and other plant tissue, the infected tendrils here on the pea. One of the giveaways for identifying white mold is you'll see this white cottony mass that is produced on the infected tissue, and that is really what gives the white mold pathogen away. White, fluffy, cottony fungal mass growing on the surface when the humidity is high and the canopy is wet. So this is a look at when the canopy starts to dry down. And this is actually, if you look here, there is a lesion, a white mold lesion that starts there and it ends right here. And then you have green healthy tissue here and green healthy tissue here above. And what happens is the white mold pathogen actually produces a compound that will bleach the tissue that it infects. And so when it starts to dry down, it actually has the lesion has a bleached white appearance to it, or tan appearance, depending on if it's chickpea or pea or lentil. But it's a bleached appearance, and you can actually crack open this stem tissue, and you'll either see sclerotia, which I'm going to talk about, which are the survival structures. Usually you'll find them on the inside of that tissue, and I'll show you what those look like. So here in a little bit. These are infected pods, once again, with the white mold pathogen. What happened was the tips of these pods were dangling down from the plant, and they were touching the soil surface, and the fungus had colonized and was growing because of the wet soil conditions. The fungus was spreading through the soil, and where these pods touched the soil, the fungus was able to infect the pod at the tip and start to grow throughout the entire pea. So this is when you crack these peas open and take a look. You have this white fluffy mycelial mass that's all throughout. And then you also have these what are called sclerotia, which are these black survival structures of the white mold pathogen that are present in infected on the inside, and also can be produced on the outside of infected tissue. So that was a look at it in pea. This is a look at it in chickpea with a photo courtesy of Dr. Weidong Chin. And here we have what's up? Nope. And here we have infected, this is chickpea, and you can see the white mold pathogen is growing in the soil and has infected the chickpeas at the base and is now starting to move up and colonize the entire stem. And this is going to kill and girdle the chickpea at the base and is killing these plants. This is a look at lentil. White mold loves high moisture and high humidity. That's when it starts to develop. In drier production areas, when you've got 2 or more days of continuous rain or moisture, those are going to be conditions where white mold can start to develop. And it develops when the canopy is closed, it's thick, it's dense, and it's tight to the ground. I'll show another instance where when leaf tissue or foliar tissue falls into the canopy and becomes wet, there's some things called ascospores, and I'm going to show you that are another type of spore of this pathogen that can also cause infection. But that's what it looks like in lentil. This, once again, is on lentil, and you see the white, fluffy mycelial mass, and that's what you're looking for to identify white mold. So another picture, this is it colonizing. The white mold pathogen started colonizing this chickpea at the base, and then it started to move up and it killed the plant. And here you have these survival structures called the sclerotia that are growing on the outside. Those will fall back into the soil and be ready to infect again the next year. This is just a picture. These sclerotia can be all sorts of different sizes and shapes. So this is a sclerotium on the surface of soil. Here's another smaller one over here. And this is just some that I collected from some soil and compared it to the size of the penny here. But you see that it can be really different sizes and shapes. For the most part, a lot of them tend to be this size and shape, and they tend to look like mouse droppings. So don't eat mouse droppings. So, all right, that's the take-home message. All right, so here I wanted to show you the cycle of this white mold pathogen. So it starts in this infected tissue. This is a little bit small, but there's these black sclerotia that develop in the infected tissue. That infected tissue falls and becomes incorporated into the soil. These sclerotia can germinate directly and send mycelial mass or fungal mass and colonize the soil and can infect anything that's touching the soil. So these were infected pea pods. The sclerotia also can produce these little mushrooms. This is called an apothecium. And these mushrooms produce these what are called ascospores. There's 8 spores to a sac, and they produce thousands of spores. And these spores are released into the air, and they can come in contact with flowers that then can drop down into the canopy, or other leaf material that drops down into the canopy and acts as a nutrient source. And when it's wet, these ascospores can germinate, and they'll start to infect the tissue wherever they end up landing in the plant canopy. But usually a flower or dead leaf tissue provides the nutrient for it to start colonizing. So it colonizes the stem tissue, then that stem tissue or pods fall back in the soil, and the process starts all over again. So what's the management strategy for white mold? You want to plant sclerotia-free seed. A lot of seed that's harvested may have to be cleaned, like I showed you, the sclerotia that formed in the pea pods. So they need to be sclerotia-free. You try to maximize the aeration throughout the canopy is important. Upright varieties are better than prostrate varieties. For example, in peas, you have the aphylla or semi-leafless type that stand up and don't have as much canopy versus the normal type. And the normal type are going to be more susceptible to white mold than the upright semi-leafless canopies. You also want to avoid vine contact with the soil. That's why these upright varieties that tie together are more naturally resistant due to their architecture. They're not as easily infected by the white mold pathogen. Once again, I mentioned these semi-leafless varieties have less, they allow the canopy to be more aerated because it takes high humidity, close to 100% humidity for the fungus to develop. And then oftentimes, and you can't do this in dry land, but in irrigated land, they'll actually let that top soil dry out before they apply another an application of water. And that's because they want that the fungus that's colonizing the soil to dry out and to wither before they do another application so it doesn't infect the plants. The only non-host, white mold is a generalist as far as all the different crop plants that it can infect. It will infect all the pulses, and it infects a number of different canola and mustards and other things that can be grown in rotation. The only real non-hosts are cereals, our non-host plants, your wheat and your barley. And if you can grow corn on dry land, which may be in the North Dakota or elsewhere, corn is also not a host of the white mold pathogen. And there's no real resistance in the pulses, but they do vary in their tolerance to the pathogen. So fungicide management, there's a number of different fungicides that are efficacious to different levels to manage a white mold pathogen. You want to apply these at bloom and prior to canopy closure. So Endura, which is boscalid, Omega, fluazinam, Topsin, all of these that are listed here are different products that have shown some efficacy from very good, such as Endura and Omega and Proline on lentil, white mold and lentil, for example, with some work done by Michael Wunsch in North Dakota State. And so there are products available. They do not completely prevent infection, but they can go a long ways to managing the problem. There also is one biorational, which is just a fancy word they want us to use now for a biological treatment. And there's a product called Contans WG, Coniothyram minitans, which has been used and spread in the soil to try to help colonize these sclerotia that are present in the soil and to eat them up, so to say, so that they don't cause infection. So one other important thing, if you're trying to manage white mold in your fields and particularly here in the Pacific Northwest where we don't get a lot of white mold, there are a lot of different weeds that are host of the white mold pathogen that you have to pay attention to. This is an example in our area of Western salsify, which is a host. I took a look in a field that was infected. The weed, Western salsify, was infected by the white mold pathogen, and it produced 42 sclerotia per infected plant. And so there are a number of different common weeds that are susceptible to white mold. So all of the following, and you can look at this later as this is saved and replayed and provided. But all of the following weeds are hosts of the white mold pathogen. So this is just an example of why it's important to plant disease-free seed in everything that you're planting. This is not a legume. This is alfalfa seed that is contaminated with the black. You see the black sclerotia that are present in this. There's one there. So all of these, they look like mouse droppings again. This is a contaminated seed. You want to take a look at your seed, whatever you're planting, in your rotation and in your pulses, and make sure it's not contaminated with these sclerotia, which can compound the issue in your field. So additional things about white mold management, cultural practices that reduce wet plant surfaces and soil moisture are going to help to manage it and to reduce the humidity that you're trying to pull down in the plant canopy. You can plant rows parallel to the prevailing wind to try to increase aeration throughout your field. You can, if white mold is an extreme problem in your area, then you can play around with row and seed spacing to try to get more aeration and air running through your canopy. Also, excessive amounts of nitrogen in soil can lead to denser canopy, which increases the humidity and favors disease development by the white mold pathogen. I'm gonna switch away from white mold to introduce you to powdery mildew, and powdery mildew causes what I like to call it looks like somebody dripped wet paint on the surface of the plants. So this is a pea plant that is speckled. Once again, powdery mildew at the early infection can be very speckled, and it's spotty. You can see down here in the corner, this is a spot that's infected by what's called a conidia that caused the infection. And so this is a picture of it on pea. This is powdery mildew growing on lentil, the surface of lentil leaves. And then after time, it can end up colonizing the entire leaf surface. Early on, you can actually take that and wipe it off, and it looks like you're almost polishing the leaf. So you can actually wipe off this fungal mass that's present on the surface of the leaf tissue. So this is a look of it, and that's kind of bleached out a little bit, but this is a look on chickpea of powdery mildew growing on the surface of chickpea leaf. And this is a look at it on a lentil leaf, on lentils. So you can see what these are looking like. And as far as management of powdery mildew, there's a lot of what's called single gene resistance available in certain cultivars across the lentils, chickpeas, and peas. And so it's a single gene, but there's different genes that can provide that resistance to different types of powdery mildew. Typically, the powdery mildew appears later in the year as the plants reach maturity, but it can infect early on. One of the main times I saw powdery mildew in the Pacific Northwest was we had a frost in July that damaged the peas or stressed them out, and powdery mildew came in behind the stressed plants from that frost and caused a major epidemic in a field that I was looking at. There's lots of different foliar fungicides, such as strobilurins, that are effective against powdery mildew. And sulfur, aqueous spray of sulfur can also be very effective in managing powdery mildew as a contact fungicide. So with that, I'll take any questions that anybody might have.
So does powdery mildew, does it make an impact on yield?
Yes, yeah, it can damage your seed quality because it can infect the pods, and it will stunt the growth of your plant and impact your seed quality and quantity.